Morning folks, hope you're doing well. Bright and early here on a March morning 2025 in Lucas Heights in Sutherland Shire, south of Sydney. We're just west of our beautiful and only nuclear reactor in Australia. And this is the Lucas Heights conservation area. Sort of serves as a formal mountain biking area, which a lot of work's been put into to keep it ecologically sustainable. And we're sort of on a plateau here. Not sure if it's part of the Menai Plateau, but it's sort of a plateau here on the higher ground where we get these beautiful lateritic shrublands. And we do get some sandstone outcropping, but up on the plateau here, we're sort of on what's called the Mittagong Formation. Sort of a deposit of slightly different geology that's part of the Sydney Basin, intermingling with the sandstone and the shale. Parts of this soil here have quite a strong clay content, and we do get the sandstone outcropping further west. Further east, we even get into some nice Sydney turpentine ironbark forests where I've made some videos before. But here we've got a really strong sort of sclerophyllous lateritic shrublands, things like Angophora hispida, a whole heap of Banksias and Hakeas, a lot of Proteaceae members. But there's a really interesting eucalypt here we can capture. It's a bit of a funny one, this one, but this video focuses on what we call the scaly bark, Eucalyptus squamosa. It's a bit of an obscure one, though on iNaturalist there's plenty of observations. So it's good to see that people have sort of gone to the trouble of putting a fair few on, because it's a bit of an obscure eucalypt. It's one you tend to not see very much of. It doesn't really tend to grow in really dominant sort of patches, but here, just at this particular spot, there is a lot of it. And it's sort of growing as both a mallee and a sort of taller isolated trees, though most of the time they're sort of mallees, I guess. Yeah. Eucalyptus squamosa, it's named for the scaly bark. The bark's a bit hard to define. It's fibrous. It's a little bit tessellated. It comes off in these chunks. It almost goes to the tips of the branches, although the very upper branches are bare. I'd just call it sort of small fibrous chunks, I guess, there. And it's growing here with trees like scribbly gum, probably Eucalyptus rustomosa we'd call it, and Corymbia gymifera. It's growing with those two here, and those two are growing as a mallee as well in this really, what I'd call beautiful lateritic sort of shrubland. Eucalyptus squamosa, it's got a bit of a limited distribution. It's pretty much a Greater Sydney species. It goes up as far as Cessnock, as far as I can see. Cessnock in the Hunter Valley, comes down from there pretty much south and maybe a bit southeast, and all through the Sydney Basin. I find it on Hawkesbury sandstone ridges. That's a place you can find it. And similar habitats to this one around Sydney. Got some beautiful birds here keeping me company. And it'll go down south to about, I think it goes down not even as far as Wollongong, possibly a bit north of there. And it'll go as west as about, I think, the lower Blue Mountains. I think it gets into around Springwood. I think there's a lot of records around Springwood. I don't think it goes further up the Blue Mountains than that. There's records around Lake Burragarang, and there's some records up the Putty Road out of Wiseman's Ferry going back up towards that Cessnock area. But that's pretty much the distribution. It's a Greater Sydney species. And I think it's sort of a little bit rare. You don't pick it up everywhere. You know, it's when I think about that Eucalyptus macarthuri, I just did a video on. Whilst I find squamosa to be just as rare, it's you just don't see a lot of it. There is a good population here. It's got these bluey green leaves. They're very blue. They're almost on the blue side. So I know it's early morning light here, but they've got this beautiful bluey green colour. They're completely concolorous. There's no hint of any discoloration. So it's another concolorous euc. I've never really observed the juvenile foliage, but I'll try and get some and see if there's anything markedly different about it. At the moment, we had a fog here this morning, even though we've got some really hot weather coming up over the next few days. The last burst of summer that you always get in March and April sometimes here in Sydney. There's these beautiful water droplets on the edge of the leaves. Not that that's any big deal, but I just like to focus on the micro sometimes. Yeah, hopefully you can see those water droplets there. Quite nice. Red stems, these beautiful red stems. And sort of a euc you can pick up pretty easily when you see it. Just due to the habitat. It's mainly the habitat that gives it away, sorry. What I say about them is they're not the most attractive eucalypts. They tend to, I sort of call them a little bit miserable. They tend to sort of look half dead a lot of the time. This one's a nice healthy one, and there's a nice healthy population here. But I do call them a miserable eucalypt. They just tend to look half dead a lot of the time. That's probably been a bit unfair to them, but that's just how they look. I've got it in a bucket with one called Eucalyptus paramatensis, the Parramatta red gum. It reminds me of Parramatta red gum a little bit. And Parramatta red gum, a lot of the time you see that around Sydney. It just looks like it's half dead. It's the most miserable looking eucalypt. But you might be familiar with some other species that fit into that bucket. But look, these guys are looking pretty good. They always just look like they're suffering from something, either pests or diseases, or yeah, they just look like they're having a hard time. But that makes for a really good ID feature, I guess. There's just a whole heap of them in here growing as mallees. And they're described as being to 12 metres tall. So 12 metres is sort of all you're going to get out of them, really. And that's probably pretty accurate. I've never seen many too much bigger than that. And it's probably their habitat as well that just limits the height. Just coming through, and always pretty uniform, the leaves. You can see they get a good width to them. Probably these leaves here, easily 3 centimetres wide. They might get to 4 centimetres wide. Maybe this is more juvenile foliage perhaps, but easily 4 centimetres wide, completely concolorous. Can't see any variation to that there. I'm going to try and get some buds and fruit. I reckon I'm going to battle, but I'll see how I go and hopefully can get some buds and fruit to show you. Just coincidentally, it's growing here with a threatened species called Melaleucadinii. There's a ton of that here in this Lucas Heights conservation area. So just a bit of additional info there. All right, let's see what we can find in terms of fertile material. There's just absolutely no material on these trees, but just giving you another example of the sort of situations they can grow in. If you just look at this beautiful shrubland here, I'm on pretty even ground that's sort of rising a little bit, rising to the east. But I'm just surrounded by, I've got Corymbia gomifera and Eucalyptus capitulata, but I've just got a ton of squamosa growing as a mallee. Just copses of it, like this over here. It probably is one of the biggest sort of subpopulations I've seen, I think, in my time. But in the Hawkesbury Sandstone National Parks around Sydney, if you get into the sort of wetter heath, squamosa tends to turn up, or if you get on the sandstone ridge tops, it can turn up as well. But yeah, like I said, you just don't see it in very high numbers. But it's all through here, just growing as these little, it's growing as a mid-story shrub. And as sort of mallees up to about, 5-6 metres or so. I've got just the start of the buds, and that's probably not going to do it justice, but the buds are described as being in 7 to 13. They're given that bracket on New South Wales Flora, 7 to 13. But what I've just picked up on is, and I can expand my knowledge and limitation as we go on, is like that beautiful Eucalyptus fastigata, they're describing this guy as having paired umbellasters, not all the time, but a lot of the time as well. So check that out. So I'll apologise, I was sort of waffling on that fastigata is one of the only ones with paired umbellasters. Well, that's not quite right. Squamosa. And those two eucalypts have got nothing to do with each other. Like, you'll never find them growing together unless you're in an arboretum. Squamosa also does the paired umbellasters, like fastigata. So isn't that cool? That's what I've just picked up on. It says often paired, where I'd say, fastigata, they're pretty much always paired, or mostly always paired, but this is saying often paired, and we can see that feature there. Pretty cool. So I forget where I read that fastigata was one of the only ones that did it, but obviously there's more eucalypts that can do it. Probably not too many, but squamosa will throw the paired umbellasters as well. But that's as far as they're formed at this point in time. It's just probably worth documenting. I'm surrounded by squamosa, beautiful copses, just these really nice copses. And maybe it's the time of year, but I can't find a single fruit. I can't find a single fruit or bud. So like I said, I've got some photos of the buds, so I'll add them in. I picked them up the other day. But that might be a useful observation, a useful feature. Some ukes, they drop a ton of material. I've looked at about 100 of these mallees and they don't have a single fruit. So what I'm thinking is I'll just try another population when I'm filming some other ukes later today, and see if we can just try a different spot and see what we can get. But whether it's the wrong time of year or whether they're just really miserable, as I keep saying, this is how I refer to this one. Just absolutely nothing. I've come to a totally different location, Royal National Park. This is a Warrnambool Road, and we've got some really dense shrubby vegetation on the side of the road. There's Scaly Bark in amongst everything else, Corymbia gomifera, Eucalyptus racemosa, what I think is Eucalyptus capitulata, all growing as mallees. And just in between here, had to drive along really slowly and discern them. There's a Scaly Bark just through there, and I think it's got some buds on it. So let's just have a look and see what we can get. And there's our beautiful buds for Eucalyptus squamosa. And there's the paired umbellasters. So I take it all back with Fastigator. Maybe not take it all back, but this is obviously another euc that can throw the paired umbellasters. Again, all I'm saying is there's no way you'd confuse it with Fastigator. Totally different trees, growing in totally different habitats. You'll never find them together. But that's in 7s, or they might be 8 actually. 7 to 13 they're describing them as online. I haven't checked what Euclid has said, but New South Wales Flora are saying 7 to 13. So as long as we're in that 7 to 15 bracket, it's a euc that you're probably never going to need the buds to identify it anyway. Just because of their habitat, their typical trunk appearance. But it's finally good to get some in bud after having those ones early this morning, which just had absolutely nothing on them. They're a nice red colour. I think the sunlight helps a bit. Yeah, beautiful red. Check them out. Red operculum. I assume they're going from green to red. There's 8 in that cluster. And beautifully paired in most cases. All I've been able to liberate is these old crusties. But I guess that'll do. That's what they look like. You can see just the scaly, diseased sort of look to them. It's like they've sort of been overtaken by the forest. It's a bit Lord of the Ringsy, isn't it? They're a bit almost like an ant. Yeah, maybe covered in fungi or moss or lichen or something like that. They're pretty crusty, almost sort of petrified. But that's their general shape. You can see they've got exserted valves. 3, maybe 4 exerted valves, I'd assume. Got a long peduncle, short pedicel, and I'm sure they get in a nicer state than this, but that's generally what they look like. But don't they look beautifully sort of petrified? Like they're just they provide a sort of habitat for maybe lichens and stuff like that to sort of colonise them. Bloody awesome. That's about all I can find with the fruit. New South Wales Flora says 7 to 13. Euclid says 7, 9, 11 in the cluster, or the umbellaster. I'll just be done with it and say 7 to 15 if you're going to report that sort of thing. But just look out for that. You might be limited to 7, 9, 11, 13. 7 to 15 will do me. But yeah, I never really looked at these fruits before. But yeah, quite interesting. Alrighty, that's probably enough for Eucalyptus squamosa. Just got the canopy here above me. So this one's about, maybe 6, 7 metres tall. Good to get those buds finally.